Mr. President, I've come back on the floor again this afternoon to plead with my colleagues to pass legislation that deals with the toxic algal blooms that are affecting many of our states, including my state of Ohio. This, it turns out, Mr. President, is the one-year anniversary of the water crisis which occurred in Toledo, Ohio. I see my colleague from Ohio is now on the floor also, and he'll remember this well. But it was a year ago when we found that there were toxic algal blooms around the intake valve in Toledo, Ohio, making the water unsuitable. Therefore, there was an advisory sent out to 500,000 people that said, don't drink the water. You can imagine the chaos that occurred. And you can imagine how difficult this was for the people who live in the Toledo area who rely on this water. By the way, there are about 3 million Ohioans who rely on Lake Erie water, and more than twice that many around the country in other states like Michigan. So this is a critical issue. Last week, it turned out that there were algal blooms that were moving within a few miles of the same intake valve, the same kind of blue-green toxic algal blooms. I was on the lake weekend before last to see some of this. And so the city of Toledo, within a couple of days, changed the city's water quality status from clear to watch. So we're in a watch status right now because of the amounts of toxins that have drifted closer to the intake valve. So we have a problem right now. We know that the toxic algal bloom prediction for this year in Lake Erie is projected to be worse than it was last year, almost as bad as it was during another crisis period in 2011 when a lot of the beaches were closed down, when people weren't able to take their pets to the water, when fishing was pretty much shut down because of the algal blooms. This is a huge issue. It's an economic development issue. It's a health and safety issue. It's an issue that goes to the heart of the economy in this part of Ohio where we have relatively high unemployment and where the Lake Erie is the single biggest driver of economic activity. In fact, it's the biggest destination in the state of Ohio. It's our biggest resource for tourism. But it's not just Lake Erie. We now have this in Grand Lake St. Mary's. There's an advisory out on water in Grand Lake St. Mary's, which is a reservoir that's inland. It's a freshwater reservoir south of Lake Erie. Same thing, toxic algal blooms. We had a lot of rain earlier this spring and summer, as those of us in the Midwest will remember, and that washed a lot of effluent into the lakes, a lot of nitrogen, a lot of phosphorus, the things that cause algal blooms to grow, and then we've had some hot weather. That's a bad combination. All we're asking tonight, and again, I see my colleague, Senator Brown, is on the floor here too. We've drafted legislation to get the EPA more engaged in this issue, to help Ohio more, and frankly, to help all of the states represented here. We've had this legislation on the floor of the Senate for over 40 days, 45 days, I think. We've had it cleared on both sides of the aisle. In other words, there's no substantive concern about it. It took a while to do that, to be frank. We had to work through with some people on my side of the aisle who thought maybe EPA didn't have a role here. But EPA does have a role. It's a really important role. It can bring best practices. It certainly can bring the best research done in the country. It happens to be done in Cincinnati, among other places, at EPA. And we've required EPA under this legislation to come up with a plan to deal with this issue immediately for Lake Erie, working with the other agencies like USGS, like NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, like the USDA, and to come up with a plan that helps us to deal with this issue right now. So if you live in the Toledo area this evening, you're worried. There's a watch on. Once again, you're worried you're not going to have water supply that's safe for you and your kids. If you live somewhere else along the lake, say in Cleveland or Sandusky, you're worried too, because these same toxic algal blooms know no barriers, no boundaries, and they move around the lake. All we're asking tonight is that we are able to pass legislation that is straightforward, that is nonpartisan. It's not just bipartisan, I'd say it's nonpartisan. It's very sensible. It highlights the need for us to take immediate action because it talks about some of the issues that are involved. There are 42 water systems in Ohio that are now susceptible to harmful algal blooms, for instance. It talks about the fact that we've got to be sure that we're not just protecting Lake Erie, but other bodies of fresh water. And it forces, again, EPA to come up with a plan that helps us deal with this issue right now. This legislation passed the House already. And it didn't just pass the House, it passed the House with a vote of 375 to 37. Not many pieces of legislation pass the House with those kind of numbers. And again, Senator Brown and I have been trying for more than 4 months to get that House-passed bill passed here in the Senate. We've now worked through all the substantive problems. I tried to do this on Thursday evening, and I was told I had to stop, and I was going to get blocked from doing it because the other side had other legislation they wanted to consider that had not been passed in the House, much less passed in the House 375 to 37. If we pass this legislation tonight, if we're able to get it through with a voice vote and get it done, it will go to the president and he will sign it. In other words, it'll become law. That's what the people who I represent are looking for. Again, I noticed my colleague, Senator Brown's on the floor. If he's interested, I certainly will yield to him, and any comments he has, I would appreciate hearing.
I thank my colleague from Ohio, Mr. President.
Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, and I'll be brief and turn it back to Senator Portman. We've worked on this issue for a long time. We remember what happened with algae blooms 4 years ago. We remember just last year, 1 year ago, in August, that 500,000 people in Northwest Ohio couldn't drink, didn't have drinking water. Imagine what that does to a community for 2.5, 3 days. We know that the western basin of Lake Erie is the shallowest part of any of the Great Lakes, only 30 feet deep in the western basin. Contrast that with Lake Superior, 600 feet deep on the average, and you can see the vulnerability of Lake Erie and what it means. And it's whether it's from runoff, whether it's from agriculture and homeowners and commercial industrial establishments. The Maumee River Basin is the largest of feeding any of the Great Lakes, whether it's the coming together on climate change and the heating of the water and all the issues that affect this short-term and long-term. Our legislation will help us this year. It will help us in the next couple of years. We obviously need long-term solutions too, but this is critical. I called the mayor of Toledo today. I know the other Senator Portman is working with the city and the county and the state EPA and the US EPA on this. This is really crucial for people in our state and ultimately throughout the Great Lakes as these problems proliferate. I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
I thank my colleague from Ohio for his good work on this bill, and he helped to improve this legislation and make it more effective. It's about having the EPA play a bigger role in how you monitor, but also how you treat the water, how you establish when there's a problem. This is needed, and it's needed now, and it's immediate. This is a photograph of about 8 days ago, not this past weekend before, on the lake. If you can see this jar right here, this was collected by this charter boat captain, who actually is one of the charter boat captains who goes out every day and collects samples that are then used by the experts to determine not just where the algal blooms are, but the level of toxicity. This is what we found. As you can see, that doesn't look very appetizing. It's thick, it's green, it's filled with the kind of toxins that if you get in the drinking water can affect people in very negative ways. We know that there are rashes right now that people are getting from some other, again, freshwater reservoirs in our area from being in contact with the water. We know that if we don't deal with this issue, we're going to have more of this. We know that this is an issue that already costs our communities a lot to mitigate it. In Grand Lake St. Mary's, as I mentioned earlier, they have already shut down some of the beaches because of this. The city of Salina spends $450,000 annually to deal with this. So this is also a taxpayer issue. Columbus was recently forced to spend over $700,000 to mitigate an outbreak in their reservoir. This is happening right now as we talk. And we just want this legislation to be out there as one of the tools in the toolbox to deal with it. And it's a very sensible one. It gets the EPA engaged in a way that across the aisle, Republican and Democrat, across the Capitol, House and Senate, we agree on. Let's get this done tonight. Mr. President, I'm now going to ask that we get this legislation done by asking unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to H.R. 212, which is at the desk, that the bill be read a third time, the Senate vote on passage of the bill with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President.
The Senator from Rhode Island.
We've been through this before, so I think the Senator from Ohio knows what I'm going to say, but the bill that he proposes to go forward on these terms has been paired by our side with the National Estuary Program, which, like his bill, is bipartisan, like his bill, is non-controversial, has been passed over and over again by the Senate. Indeed, it was originally, I think, the work of Republican Senator John Chafee of Rhode Island. It has been passed by the House over and over again. This is a reauthorization. If we clear it through the House, it will go to the President for signing. And our bill came through the Environment Public Works Committee in regular order, whereas this has come over from the House, been held at the desk, never reviewed by the Committee of Jurisdiction, and is now being hotlined, which is fine, except that I understand it to be a tradition around here that we compare non-controversial bills. And I don't understand why when our bill, the estuary bill, is non-controversial also, bipartisan also, the work of Senator Vitter, who is has been the ranking member, the chairman of the committee, why there's this effort week after week to separate the two rather than just pass them both. So I would ask that the senator amend his unanimous consent to read as follows. Unanimous consent that the EPW committee be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 212, which is the Drinking Water Protection Program, a bill to provide for the assessment and management of the risk of algal toxins in drinking water, and S-1523, a bill to reauthorize the National Estuary Program. Further, the Senate proceed to their immediate consideration en bloc. The Senate proceed to vote on passage of the bills, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. If the senator will agree to that so that the pairing is maintained, then I will have no objection. If he will not agree to it, then I must object, because I don't know why these bills are being repeatedly taken apart.
Does the senator from Ohio modify his request?
No, I can't modify my request because his bill's not cleared, and he knows that. Mr. President?
Is there objection? Is there objection to the original request?
There is.
Objection is heard.
Yeah, look,
Senator from Ohio.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. We have a health and safety issue on the floor of the Senate. It's ready to go. You just heard from me. You just heard from Senator Brown. It's bipartisan. It's bicameral. It's ready to go to the President. And I must say to my friend, Senator from Rhode Island, who talked about his legislation, I have no problem with your legislation, but you haven't had it cleared. You said this has been going on weeks and weeks. That's not true. This came on to our radar screen on Thursday night last week, when after over 40 days on the floor with our bill, we got it all cleared, and then we find out just prior to my going and asking, then we have a voice vote on it. Now you all want to pair it with another piece of legislation that has nothing to do with health and safety. It's a reauthorization of a program that has not been passed by this House. So the gentleman said it's been passed by the House. It has not been passed by the House. It may have been passed by the House in previous Congresses, but that doesn't count. What counts is that our bill has passed the House with a vote of 375 to 37. It's now on the floor. The people I represent deserve to have our government work for them right now to help deal with this algal bloom problem. And you guys are blocking this thing with legislation you say is nonpartisan, non-controversial. I'm happy to support you in that. In fact, what I did last week on Thursday when I found out about it, I started clearing it for you because you guys hadn't done it. So I put it in the clearance process. As of today, we have some concerns on my side of the aisle. Why? Nobody has seen it yet. They're seeing it for the first time. We went out of session right after I started clearing it. We're back in session now. People are looking at it. I'm happy to support your bill. But don't block our bill because you're looking for me to support your bill. I'm happy to support your bill, but not if it's going to keep us from moving forward tonight. Can I agree to pair it? Because there will be an objection because people haven't had a chance to look at it. I know that the committee likes to pair things sometimes. They don't always pair, by the way. But I think this is ridiculous that we can't move forward on a really simple piece of legislation that we've worked on for over 40 days. Everybody's fine with it. There's no substantive problem. It's a health and safety issue. Let's go ahead with this. In this instance, let's put partisanship aside. I support your bill. I will support your bill. I'll vote for your bill. I'll continue to try to clear it, even though you all didn't clear it. I'm the one trying to clear it. I don't know if you've even cleared it on your side. I don't know if you even put it in the process yet. But obviously you have to do that in order for this to happen. So I'm amazed that we're going to actually stop this legislation that is needed right now for legislation that has not passed the House, that is not going to go to the President for signature, that is not due to an imminent health and safety issue, and instead for those people in northern Ohio and throughout our state who are worried about these algal blooms right now, the federal government's not going to be there for them. Because of some disagreement on the floor of this chamber, where at the last minute, the very last minute, Democrats step forward and say, no, we're not going to let this bipartisan bill go forward because we want to insist that it be paired with one that has not gone through the clearance process. So I commit to my friend that I will support your bill. I've had a chance to look at it over the weekend. I'm okay with it, but it has not been cleared, and it is not going to go to the President for signature. And it is not one of these issues, now that the House has gone out. Recall, the House of Representatives is not in session this week. So even if, by some miracle, you could get your bill cleared here and then get it cleared in the House, that can't happen because the House is out of session. They're coming back in September. We are in session. We can get this done. We can send it to the President. We can let people know they can sleep a little more comfortably at night, a little more peace of mind by the fact that we have actually taken action here to get this expert agency that deals with water quality engaged and involved to help the local folks, the state folks, the experts back home to be able to do the right thing, to be able to avoid another water crisis and all of the issues that Senator Brown and I saw when we were up there. I went up with bottles of water, threw them in the back of my pickup, and they were gone like that. Why? Families were desperate to be sure that they had water for their kids. Mothers were desperate that they had water to be able to ensure that their families weren't going to be left without access to what is perhaps the most important thing any of us can imagine, which is clean water that you can drink and use for cooking. And so I would hope again, and I would ask again, unanimous consent, that my colleague yield and that we allow this bill to go forward. I would ask we proceed to 212, which is at the desk. The bill be read a third time, and the Senate vote on passage of the bill with no intervening action or debate.
I object.
Is there objection? Objection is heard.
No, I'm sorry to hear that. And I'll be back again tomorrow. And I'll be back again the next day. And I'll be back again and again because we want to get this done. This is simple. There's no real mystery here. This is an opportunity to get something done that helps people, not just in my state, but around the country, to deal with a very real problem they're facing this summer now.